I would like to introduce and welcome back to the program Sarah Cortez, the founder of Catholic Literary Arts. Sarah, welcome to Catholic Lunch Break.
Hey, Tim. Thank you.
It's so good to have you back. Phone with us?
Yes, it's a blessing to be here with you, Tim.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. Now, where are we calling you from? I forget which city you're located in.
So I'm in the East Coast, North Carolina.
Gotcha.
So I'm an hour older than you, but not necessarily an hour wiser.
Well, you should be, because you are the founder of Wise Blood Books, and so one would hope that a little bit of that rubs off on you. But I'm going to turn to Sarah now, because Sarah, Catholic Literary Arts, for those who are not familiar, can you give an elevator pitch of like what your mission is?
Sure. We guide, train, educate, and mentor Catholic writers and all people of goodwill in learning to write, in enjoying writing, in reading, in being inspired with spiritual food and practical skills.
And you have, since COVID has been kind of, wreaking havoc on all of our personal lives, you've been doing a lot of virtual classes, which is actually an opportunity. You were just telling me before the show started about some contacts that you've made in Europe and Australia and other places. And this is really kind of an opportunity to expand your network there. So what is the series that's coming up starting in December that anyone in our listening audience can participate in, whether they're a writer or not?
Okay, Tim, this is very exciting, and this is a series that Joshua Hren is teaching. Hello, Joshua. We miss you here in Houston, by the way.
Likewise, Sarah. Yeah, it's great to at least be able to chat.
Absolutely. Joshua is teaching 3 classes, Thursday night, 7 p.m., on the Christ-centered short story.
The Christ-centered short story. Okay, so Joshua, is this geared towards writers, or is this geared towards readers or Catholics, or who would you say is the ideal audience for this class?
The ideal audience would be really anyone, I would say, over in the later ages of high school or older, Catholic or not. In terms of the question of whether it's for readers or writers, the answer is both. In the sense that the way that we're going to talk about these stories will include sort of teaching points on how we can imitate some of the devices that are being used by these writers, but also there'll be plenty of rich takeaways for listeners who are not in any way involved in writing or making art on their own.
Okay, so I want to ask about the content of what you chose here to focus on, the Christ-centered short story. I went into that thinking, ooh, short stories, is it Flannery O'Connor? But you actually went with Russians. We've got Dostoevsky, Solovyov, who I've never read actually, and Solzhenitsyn, who's quite famous. But why did you go with Russians?
Right. So it was actually not first and foremost a decision to go with the Russians, but it was more an attempt to try to select some stories that would speak into some of, I think, the deepest crises of our moment, or some of the concerns and questions and confusion that sort of are rampant in a lot of ways in the church and the world right now. And Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov is the novel which the Grand Inquisitor is taken from. The Grand Inquisitor, which is our first lesson, will happen on Thursday, the 3rd of December at 7. And this is a story where it's told by an atheistic character within the Brothers Karamazov, one of the Karamazov brothers, and he tells it as a kind of parable of Christ returning to earth during the Spanish Inquisition to show himself for a moment to those who are suffering and those who are stagnating in sin but still are loving Christ. And when Christ returns in this fictional reimagining, his miracles solicit faith from the people again, and just when he is being lauded by them, the Grand Inquisitor arrests the Son of God and subjects him to this interrogation and enlightens him as to what would truly save mankind. So he tells Jesus all the mistakes that he made, and he tells him all the ways that the church has sort of updated his teachings or completely altered his teachings. And yet, as Romano Guardini, the great German philosopher and theologian, argues, the Christ figure that Ivan Karamazov comes up with in this legend really does not resemble the Christ of the Gospels. And so one of the things that we're going to explore during this seminar is the distinctions that we need to make between the false Christ that is invented by Ivan Karamazov, and how getting away from or passing through those falsities can help us to more fully understand the true Word made flesh. But this story should also help to provoke some conversation about the difference between the historical church, with its sometimes corruptions and especially in leadership of late, and yet also the reality of the goodness of the church, and that the answer is not simply just to try to recover some sort of ideal romantic vision of Christ that's totally separated from the church.
Yeah, I find
that's the first session.
What I find fascinating about this selection is that you've got multiple levels of remove away from the actual story. So it's in a novel called The Brothers Karamazov, but in that novel, this one character is telling a story. And he's telling the story that involves an inquisitor and Christ, but this Christ is not resembling the Christ of the Gospels. So it sounds like there's something to be learned from examining that. What would you say to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So most basically, what I would say is that, right, sometimes you'll see these Hallmark cards with a quote from Shakespeare, and it'll say, it'll cite something that, let's say, one of his villains said in Richard III, and then the tagline will say Shakespeare. Well, the difficulty with that is, of course, that I'm sure that Shakespeare would not want to have one of his villains' quotes attributed to him, right? And so you're right. The Christ figure that Ivan Karamazov imagines in this story that the Grand Inquisitor is not Dostoevsky's understanding of Christ, right?
And Dostoevsky was Russian Orthodox, wasn't he?
Correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So let's move on to the next one. This is Vladimir Solovyov's A Short Tale of the Antichrist. Now, in a Christ-centered short story, why are you looking at an Antichrist?
That's an excellent question. Yeah. So just to begin with, I'd say that, right, there are sort of two traditions of who the Antichrist is or who the Antichrist will be or has been. And one of these traditions is in consonance with the Italian Renaissance painter Luca Signorelli. And in his painting of the Antichrist looks exactly like the Christ that we know from iconography, right? So from a distance, when we're looking at his depiction of the Antichrist, we initially think that we're looking at Christ. But when we look a little bit closer, we see that he's actually listening to what a demon is whispering in his ear. And then on the other hand, right, the other strand of the tradition concerning who the Antichrist is posits him as this kind of pure, unconcealed evil that is recognizable as evil. So Solovyev, in his short tale of the Antichrist, pursues the path that Signorelli pursued, and he gives us an Antichrist who actually strives for and attains many good things, right? He deceives others primarily by doing things that are at least apparently very good, and at least apparently very much in accord with who Christ is and what Christ wants us to do. And so what we find out through a closer examination of the story is that the Antichrist himself is deceived in that he thought that the things that he was doing were truly bringing about this great reign of brotherhood and harmony, but he's actually ushering in the rule of Satan. And this is an important thing for us to consider because, right, in many different ways, in many different cases right now, the spirit of humanitarianism, or a sort of secularized brotherly love, is being sort of made to appear as though it's the same thing as Christian charity or Christian caritas, right? And these are two totally different things. And the only way that we can truly understand that this sort of secularized version of brotherly love and a sort of false promise of harmony without God, the only way that we can truly grasp that as it really is by holding it up against the true Christ, right? So once again, this sort of vision of the Antichrist helps us to understand Christ more fully.
Now, these sessions that you're going to be doing online, these are Socratic discussions. And what that means, you might need to explain that a little bit. So it can sound intimidating, but actually, in my experience, the Socratic style opens it up for more people than a traditional classroom. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. So I love teaching Socratic style. I teach in a Great Books Honors College at Belmont Abbey. And Socratic style has its weaknesses, right? John Senior, the great educator, famously said that, the problem with seminar style is that you have one loud bull in the room, let's say, whether it's a particular student who thinks that they know a lot more than they do, and they'll take over everything and they'll sort of talk, and you have to interrupt them and regain the reins of the conversation. So, of course, it has the potential to go awry in a way that just a sort of straight lecture doesn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
If the professor is just sort of talking at you.
Right. When you're just talking, then you have complete control.
That's right. Yeah. But there's definitely an art to it, and I have a lot to learn about that art, but I've been doing it for 10 years now, and it'll be a kind of an admixture of me giving a sort of mini lecture to open up these sessions, just to sort of situate us, to orient us by looking at some of the high watermarks of these stories, the most crucial passages, and then opening it up to conversation among the attendees, the readers, to ask them to offer their perspective answers to some of the most pressing questions that these stories evoke from us.
Yeah, that sounds like a really great thing to be a participant in.
Yeah, so that's the idea, right? The idea is that there's more joy, there's more sort of a dramatic mode of learning that happens, where the students who are attending will be able to arrive at insights by thinking things through in front of everybody else, right? And then, as Socrates says, the teacher is sort of the midwife helping to deliver that idea.
Okay. With our last 2 minutes here, I know you have a class you need to go teach, but what's the third one that you're going to? Because this is 3 sessions here. What's the third book that you'll be looking at?
Yeah, so we'll be looking at Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Matryona's Home, and this is an interesting story in that Solzhenitsyn is trying to, and I would argue succeeding in portraying in fiction a good soul, a beautiful soul. This is something that is notoriously difficult to do. Many of the greatest literary creations are villains, right? And
I like this better than the Antichrist one.
Yeah, right. And so John Henry Newman, right, actually goes so far as to say that literature is largely a study of man in rebellion, and that it's a contradiction in terms to attempt to present a sinless literature of a sinful man. And so he's right that most literary figures are either marked by sin or are villainous. But Solzhenitsyn succeeds in painting Matryona, who's this Russian peasant, as an icon of Christ. That is to say, she is an image of the Beatitudes. She's this long-suffering woman who undergoes a lot of persecution and loses her standing in the community in which she lives in. Her life is disfigured, but she nonetheless perseveres in this long suffering, and she ends up taking in the main character who's returning from time in the gulags, and his soul is expanded by witnessing her beatitude. And so the way that I would put it is, we have this sort of backdrop of the history of Russia, right? This history of kind of rebellion and insanity, and it's interrupted by the difficult good of the sanity and the sanctity of Matryona as the main character.
Well, I love that you're doing this for Catholic Literary Arts here in Houston, and I love that it's online, that we can get people to participate from everywhere. So if people would like to sign up for these classes, they can go to Catholic Literary Arts. And Dr. Joshua Hren, I want to thank you very much for joining us on the Catholic Lunch Break today.